for many of us, the reality is that we know that there are many forks in the road when it comes to our energy system. But to see it all in one place at one time, explaining what some of the financial or environmental consequences are when we choose one path over another, when other paths, which are being reused in other parts of the world but ignored here, is a perfect way of looking at things. In many ways, I believe that the past hour that you've just seen here on Sky News should, of course, be seen by as many Australians as possible. That is why the documentary that you have just seen is up now at skynews.com.au. Skynews.com.au, the lead story, the top. Spread that documentary as far as you possibly can. Chris Uhlmann, as a reporter, is right up there. This is something that he has been desperate to tell as a story for a long time. To have the time to tell the story, because it can be complicated. But because of his skill and the skill of the people who just put together the hour of television that you just watched, you're able to see it in bite-sized chunks, you're able to see it as a full piece of work, and you're able to see things explained, including, I just want to go back over a couple of points that are going to sit with me when I look forward to sharing this documentary with the people in my life. It's not about trying to push people towards one form of technology or the other. It's about the reality that the cost of transition has always been the central question. The central question that we have never really been asked. We've been asked about whether we should transition, but to be truly aware of what the cost of it really matters. Now, again, the national energy grid is complicated. My apologies to the people in Western Australia whom have their own system and are not befuddled by what is taking place on the east coast of Australia as well as South Australia. But Chris explains that one of the central things that we constantly are told, which is renewables are the cheapest form of electricity, the problem is, if they were the only form of electricity, well then maybe that ends up being true. But that's after the billions have been spent, in fact, close to $1 trillion, to build all of it and to have the batteries that back it up. Till then, there has to be stuff that works at night or stuff that works when the weather does not assist other forms of renewable energy. Thankfully, through the power of television graphics, he was able to explain how this works, where every part of our electricity grid helps define what every other part of it costs. I'll let him explain better than I just did.
In this high-stakes game, the lowest cost generator bids first to meet demand. Other generators follow in cost order as the stack fills. But if the last megawatt needed for supply to match demand is $300, then that's what every single player in this game gets paid. Let's underline this fact. It's the highest cost of generation that sets the price of power, which is why this slogan is so deeply misleading.
Renewable energy is incredibly cheap because its fuel is free, because it's the sunshine and the wind.
But plugging the generation gaps they leave to build a reliable electricity system is proving remarkably expensive.
That is the cost of transition. All those that have for a long time said this is the only option and it's the only option that we need to do to save the planet. Firstly, Australia's 1% of global emissions, China 33%. To move from the system that they want to move away from, mainly coal, to the full renewable system, well, of course, it's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It also requires huge swathes of regional Australia to be changed forever. Another perfect example, excellently explained in the documentary.
The end game here is to achieve net zero. Pushing roads and clearing forests and fragmenting forests just is an oxymoron towards that goal of trying to achieve net zero, because the first thing we need to be doing is keeping trees in the ground.
Stephen has used his training as a cartographer to map the number of wind and solar farms that will need to be built on the national electricity market to hit the government targets, stretching from far north Queensland through New South Wales, Victoria, west to Port Lincoln in South Australia, and across the Bass Strait to Tasmania.
Now, every time I've made this point in the past, it's thrown into some sort of bin of climate denialism. For those that are half paying attention or maybe watching us for the first time or maybe checking back in with me for the first time in a while, I am in no denial that 7 billion people on the planet, multiple industrial revolutions, is going to do something quite substantial to the natural environment. There's no question about it. More people who need to be fed than ever before, housed than ever before, kept warm or cool than ever before. No question. But Australia is 1% of the world's problem. China, under the Paris Agreement, is able to continue to pollute at an increased level until whatever they want until 2030, meaning the chances of them polluting even more between now and 2030 is almost certain. While between now and 2030 is when we're going to be cutting down trees to replace them with wind farms as a way of finding a different way of electrifying our grid. We're going to need more power than even what the current amount of power produced by things like coal and gas will actually do. Why? Because we want to electrify everything. You may have heard conversations about kitchen stoves, the push towards electric vehicles. Well, all of those things, of course, need to be powered, meaning the current grid is not big enough. In fact, we'd have to grow it by up to 4 times to potentially have one big enough and good enough and reliable enough to actually keep the lights on, keep the cars charged, and to keep the water boiling. Another quick little one here too, which is when Chris Hillman explains about solar farms. Now again, I am not against any of this technology, but the reality is you need so much of it in a continent the size of Australia, as opposed to a postage stamp in a part of Europe that can throw the extension cord over to another country, or a state in the United States that can throw an extension cord over to the next state in the United States, which has, among other things, nuclear power as a key part of the technology. So Australia is trying to swing for the fences, but is going to have to end up building a fence that's 4 times higher than it currently is in order to actually have the amount of electricity required for a population that, of course, will exponentially grow. Remember, the expectations are that this country could get to 50 million people by the year of 2060. So not only do you have to replace what was, you need to build what is, and you need to prepare for what will be. Again, Chris Hillman explaining about solar farms and why, when they work, they're very good, but when they don't, it is a big hole in the market.
This solar farm sits on 50 hectares. It has 82,000 solar panels and at peak generation will deliver 24 megawatts, and that would be on a day like today, a bright sunny day in the middle of the day. But tonight the sun will go down and it will deliver 0. And across the course of a year, you'll get 30% of its plated capacity, or a little over 7 megawatts. And that's the issue with this kind of generation. By its nature, it is off more often than it's on.
This is the point. Now, I get why, when people who don't have to live with the consequences of either their parts of Australia changing, you don't see many parks or doggy parks in built-up areas of the cities being changed. In fact, if you wanted to put one windmill anywhere near a teal electorate, you know what the response would be. So it's all pushed out into regional Australia, largely punished because they don't vote Green or Labor. But more importantly, as you hear, the reality is that the mere size of some of these things, but they don't work 24/7. And remember, everything that gets produced by renewable energy has to be stored somewhere, meaning batteries. And they have not developed the batteries that would be able to store enough of the energy for long enough for you to be able to use things through the night. Instead, you have to have lots and 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 lots of batteries. Perhaps if the government wants to be honest and said, look, what we'd really love is you to be totally self-sufficient. Something on your roof, something in your garage, and that's it. You're not part of the grid. Okay, but what about for manufacturing? But of course, the central concern that I have had, no matter what names I have been called or what fingers have been pointed as people seek to dismiss the conversation of the true cost of net zero or the cost of transition, has been the people who suffer because their bills have gone up. Their bills have gone up because there is all of this stuff that needs to be built. It will either be paid for by the government or it will be paid for by the private companies. The private companies, of course, will just pass it on to the customer. And when you're a customer who's on the pension, this is what happens.
This is what I call a payday killer. It's come in at $1,073.31. My pay, which is the pay of most age pensioners, is around $1,144. This leaves me, after I pay this bill, $71.09.
It was a spectacular piece of journalism. It was an important video for you to see. And again, congratulations to Chris Uhlmann and everyone who put it together. It is up now at skynews.com.au. If you haven't already, there's a way to subscribe. It'll cost you just $5. skynews.com.au. Spread the word and spread that doco. It was sensational.